So before I start talking about the registry, I thought I should probably just briefly kind of bring you up to speed on Duchenne and what it means for families and people living with the condition, because that all impacts very much how the registry works and how it plugs into other systems. So Duchenne is a muscle wasting condition. It's a genetic condition. It's caused by mutations in the dystrophin gene, which is the largest gene in humans. Gene was cloned back in the 80s. And relatively quickly, once the gene was cloned and sequenced, people started saying, oh, well, now we've got the gene sequence, it won't be long till we've got treatments. So now we're here 35-ish years down the line, and we're starting to see treatments coming through. So there's one treatment licensed in the UK that treats the underlying genetic cause of Duchenne in about 10% of patients. So it's by no means treatments for everybody. If we go back to the condition, so it's typically diagnosed around the age of 4, a little bit earlier, a little bit later sometimes. And it's normally when boys are failing to meet motor milestones. That's the kind of classic thing that leads to the diagnosis. It's mainly boys that are affected because it's an X-linked condition, so the gene is on the X chromosome. Although there are some case reports of girls having the condition. And also carriers can be affected. So carriers can have symptoms ranging from something close to Duchenne right through to no symptoms at all. So it's quite a complex condition. So the DMD Registry was set up back in 2006, 2007. And it was set up basically when there was a realistic chance of trials starting. So this was right about the time when trials were beginning to kick off, when people had things that they thought should be tested in trials. So globally, it was one of the first registries for Duchenne. And the original registry was built just by a parent who had some IT knowledge. So there was nothing clever or fancy about it. I think I'm right in saying there was a conversation between the then head of Action Duchenne and the parent on a train, and they decided a registry should be built, and the parent built the registry. So that's where we started off. As people were saying earlier this morning, it started off as a very basic system. It's evolved over time. Slightly more complex now, but still not as complex as it could be. So right from the start, the registry had the support of the DMD community. It was endorsed by professionals, so some of the key clinicians from across the country. And one of the very early things that happened was the establishment of the steering committee. So this group is vital for the registry. It's a committee that includes clinicians, geneticists, and families. And that steering committee controls who data is given to, or sold to, or whichever word you prefer to use. It's the control. So as Action Duchenne, we can't decide who can take the data and who can't take the data. It's all done by the steering committee. And just so everybody knows where we're talking about, we're a patient registry regulated by, obviously, data protection, GDPR. But we're a subset of what we've been talking about as registries this morning. So in Duchenne, there's two systems, cleverly represented by two circles. We've got the registry, which is what we're talking about here, and a system called North Star. So North Star was set up at about the same time as the registry, and it's a clinical audit database. So it's an NHS database, and it stores natural history data. So what that means is the registry doesn't try to store that. We store very basic medical information that's designed so we can answer the questions that the registry is built to answer. So we're not trying to answer all the questions we talked about. We're very focused on a few questions that I'll come on to later. At the moment, there's no easy way to take data from both of these systems and put it together. That would be the ideal situation, because actually between us, we probably have a very good data set. And discussions have been ongoing for a while about that, and it's something we'll continue to do. So our model, it's voluntary and kind of anonymous. It's as anonymous as we can make it. So obviously when you sign up, you're asked to put in your name and address and those kinds of details. But actually those details never leave the registry, and they can't be viewed by even people like me. So I oversee the registry, but I don't have access to go into it and find people's details. We have a curator, and she's the person that can do that. So that's very important. The data is very controlled. It's a web-based patient input model. So this is a screenshot. This was me registering last night. And so you can see how basic it is. We're not talking Facebook for registries here. It's a basic form, or several basic forms. Some of them get into more detail, so when you're typing in a genetic diagnosis, there's quite a lot of detail you're asked for. But that's it. It's fundamentally quite basic. So a patient input model, that's actually changed over time. So we started off being a clinician-entered model. It turns out clinicians don't have a lot of spare time. I can't stress that enough if you're thinking of designing a registry. Clinicians are very busy. Certainly we find they just don't have time to fill in systems, fill in forms. So I think anything that suggests they should fill in another system or another form is a challenge for clinicians. So we moved away from that to a patient input model. So we asked patients to submit their data with one exception, and that's that the gene mutation is validated by a geneticist. So the way it works, a patient registers, or for us, a family registers. So normally it's parents registering their children because the child is often quite young. They fill in a medical release form that allows us to contact the geneticist, and the geneticist can then log into the registry and add the details to that record. So the gene mutation doesn't go through any middleman, and that's really important because that's the fundamental strength of our registry. Our genetic data is probably better than any other in the UK. So who can join? So it's called the UK DMD Registry, but actually anybody affected by either Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy can join. These are very closely related conditions. They're both caused by mutations in the same gene. But Duchenne is caused by mutations that stop the production of the protein. Becker mutations result in either reduced levels of protein or a less functional protein. So anybody affected by the condition can join. That includes patients and carriers. And at the moment, we've got over 1,000 people in the registry. So it's not full coverage by any means. Numbers are a little bit hazy, but there's probably somewhere around 2,500 cases of Duchenne in the country. So we've got a significant portion, but not all. We generally say anybody in the UK can join, and anybody from a country with no registry. There's quite a lot of those around the world, but not as many as you'd think. So actually, Duchenne registries do span the whole world. Ideally, that would be a hard and fast rule, and if somebody came and registered from America, we'd say, no, thank you, go and join the American registry. What we actually see in Duchenne is lots of people joining multiple registries because families are really interested in taking part in clinical trials. So they'll join as many systems as possible to kind of maximize that opportunity. That's fine. The problem comes when you're doing global data pools. So suddenly you might have people who are in 5, 6, 8, 10 registries, and if you're doing a global data pool and they happen to be in your data set, suddenly you've got a big overlap potentially. So I was asked to mention consent, so I will mention it very briefly. So as I said, most people sign up their children, and our consent basically allows us to share data in the form of aggregate data. So we don't share individual records. Our typical data inquiry is a pharmaceutical company saying, how many people with mutation X live in the UK? Or how many people do you know of with this mutation? And we simply send back numbers. So we would never say, oh yes, well, Joe Bloggs has that mutation and he lives here. No, it's all aggregate data. We can share individual data with the treating clinician. That's within our consent. That's rare enough that I think we would almost certainly go back to the individual and ask them before we did it. I don't think we would just do that. And all this can only happen with permission from the steering committee. So if a pharmaceutical company approaches us with a query, we send it out to our steering committee. If they don't think it fits the registry's aims, if they don't trust the data requester, any host of reasons, we can actually turn it down. And we do exactly what the steering committee says. So we have basically a 2-week turnaround. So we get requests. The steering committee has 2 weeks to comment on them. And then we either go back and say yes or no to the data. So what data to collect? This is a minefield. It's complicated slightly for us by the existence of the second system, North Star. But we're also very lucky in that we work closely with TreatMD, and that's the Global Federation of Neuromuscular Disease Registries. So they have a data set of Duchenne. It's something they review from time to time, and that's built around clinical trial inclusion criteria, the data you need to do market surveillance, everything you'd hope to do from a registry. Not all registries in this federation try and do all the things, so we certainly wouldn't because we've got North Star to work with. But the data set covers a range of areas, all the demographic information you'd expect. We hold data on medical interventions, so most people with Duchenne are offered corticosteroids, long-term high dose, and we hold basically yes and no information on whether people are taking those. That's because that's a key inclusion criteria for trials. So you can already see that our data set is very much influenced by the questions we're trying to answer. The TreatMD data set includes some functional measures, and yes, I said it's all built around trials. So how do we as a registry support clinical trials? So originally, if we go back to 2006, the registry was built because there was a real prospect of trials taking place in the UK. And at the same time, nobody knew how they were going to recruit to them. Clinics, as any other rare disease, have a limited number of patients. And there wasn't a fantastic database of genetic information. And so originally, the registry was built to fill in that hole. It was built to help to help clinicians recruit patients to trials. The model back then was that a clinician would be entering data. He could come to the registry and say, I've got this clinical trial. I need these people to join it. Can you find them? And the registry would actually put people in touch with clinical trials. So it's very much built along clinical trials, the original trials, to help those. Things have moved on. The trial inclusion criteria have changed a lot over the past 15 years. And they're at the point now where they're being really, really detailed. So for the latest gene therapy trials, we're seeing inclusion criteria based around antibody titer at baseline, things like that, which as a registry, there's no way we could include that data simply because it often doesn't exist. So what we've done is move away from recruitment. I'll come back to it in a minute though. And now we're mostly concerned with feasibility studies. And so the idea here was that if clinical trials are happening, we want them to happen in the UK because we want our families to get the chance to go on those trials. And so the idea behind helping companies with feasibility studies is that if they know it's feasible and easy to run a trial in the UK, it's more likely to come here. So now we're either approached directly by farmers or via TreatMD, by farmers who are basically interested in running trials in the UK. And so I've got a battery warning. So it just popped up and said battery low. Plug in laptop. Sorry. So the kind of typical way it works, a farmer comes to us or TreatMD, says we're interested in running this trial. Please could you tell us how many people with this mutation there are in the UK? How many are seen in clinic in Newcastle, in London, and Bristol? And we basically write back with a spreadsheet they sent us, if the steering committee agrees, with a list of numbers. We generally don't charge for that, and that's because the purpose of this registry is to help families. So it's very much part of our real goals is to help families take part in clinical trials. And so we can tell pharma companies basically how many spaces they could offer at London, and they can work out the chances of filling their spaces. It also offers the chance to kind of facilitate communication between researchers and patients. So as well as offering kind of top-line data about prevalence, some natural history of the disease, we can send out surveys to targeted audiences. So a few years ago, we sent out a survey looking at nutrition. And the power of the registry is not only could we choose, say, a group with a certain mutation, we can choose by age. Everything you'd expect to be able to do, you can do, and you can target surveys to the groups that really matter. We've also identified participants for basic research projects. We can provide information to clinical care studies. So we've recently provided some information at somebody looking at steroid use across the UK. And again, we can keep patients and researchers in touch. So registries are not without challenges. So what we've done, although we've moved away from a clinician input to patient input and away from a recruitment to a feasibility study model, actually we can still do the old version if we need to. So we do still help with recruitment. We've, I think, helped with 3 trials so far this year. And these are kind of the big challenges, I guess. So as a patient registry, the big one is getting patients to come back and give you new data. So our aim is that we'd love people to come back once a year to tell us, what's happened this year. Luckily, most of the data we're most interested in doesn't change very much over time. So that's really in our favor. If this was data that changed on a 6-monthly basis, it would be much harder to collect. So, I mean, the big way that we deal with that, we employ a dedicated registry curator, and she's really well known in the community, and that's been massively important, actually. So when someone's diagnosed, they're often given a leaflet about the registry in the clinic, and often the first contact they have with somebody else in the community is when they talk to Angela. And that's a relationship that kind of develops over the years. So when we're trying to get people to update their records and Angela's phoning people, it becomes more of a kind of catch-up between friends rather than why haven't you given us your data this year? The other challenge, I think, is something that was kind of touched on earlier. It's certainly something we discussed in our group, and that's how you get the health service and regulators to take you seriously when you're collecting data from patients. So regulators are so used to seeing data from clinicians, from clinics, that's very high quality, that's collected in a certain way, that's actually quite difficult to replicate when you're collecting from patients. And so I thought it was worth mentioning that the EMA will certify patient registries. We're not certified, but we're aware that it's a possibility. So I thought I'd just throw that up there because that is a challenge being taken seriously sometimes, but I think it's worth saying that it is possible. So I think with that, I will stop. I have got some more slides after this one, but I thought I'd stop here and ask questions and take any questions. But I've got slides that show our whole data set and all sorts of things, so feel free to ask questions.